Creating the world you want to see. Adobe Max 2021. Welcome. Thank you for pulling up to my session. Thank you for being here with me today and being invested in what I have to say. I really appreciate it. My name is Laci Jordan. I'm a multidisciplinary artist and creative director, originally from Huntsville, Alabama. Shout out to the South, and currently residing in Los Angeles, California. Here's a few notable brands and companies that I've had the pleasure to work with over the years. I've highlighted a few of my personal favorites. Shout out to Adobe for having me. Soak that in. A few examples of my work. Like I mentioned, I tend to work in between different disciplines from like product design to painting to you name it. Wherever I feel like I find joy, I like to use that as an application. So, few projects, more projects, just, sort of showing off that multidisciplinary skills, and a few more, which shout out to the project on the far right because that's actually an Adobe project that I really, really, really enjoyed. Also, personal work, which is super important, and I will get to that later on in the session. So, before I had the honor to work for all those different brands, I was in my corporate bag too. I started off my career, my professional career at Walt Disney Imagineering. From there, I went to ABC Television and then to Creative Artist Agency, which is a talent agency here in Los Angeles. So, pause. How did we get there? Before I can tell you how I got there, I wanted to tell you where we're going and the journey that I plan to take you on. What we'll cover today: how to navigate the industry as a person of color and an entry level designer, the importance of creating, leading, and staying true to your values, power of attraction. How did I get these clients and projects? Defining and growing your personal brand. Things to note: this is not a tutorial, this is not a fix all moment. I don't know everything about the future. I want you to view this as a case study of stories and struggles and like those light bulb moments that I had in my career and that helped shape my path. This is about the journey, creating the world you want to see, and real time experiences. Again, a case study. All right, how did we get there? So, my education started at the University of Alabama. I mentioned I'm from Huntsville, Alabama. My family was like most families, especially families of color, where they're like, hey, girl, you need to go to school for something that's going to make money. So, I actually went to school for criminal justice and I had a double minor in political and computer science. Weird, random, I know. At some point in my career, which that's another story for a different day, I ended up taking a pivot into what they call digital media, what we know as graphic design. That was like the first pivot in my life, and we will come back to that. But essentially, it was a combination of not knowing what I wanted to do next because I was graduating early with criminal justice and a general interest. It sort of came up in an internship, and then I also have a few friends who minored in design, and I became really interested in it and decided to pivot, which leads me to my first message. And you'll notice in my presentation, I'll have different messages or different like gems I want to drop. And so this is my first message, which is follow your curiosity. If I didn't follow those breadcrumbs, even though they made absolutely no sense compared to my first career, I would not be here today. So follow that. Like if you just have an itch to like want to know something or want to learn something, follow that. Digital media. So I didn't realize this then, but that was my first stop at becoming a multidisciplinary artist. Along with graphic design courses, we were taking studio classes, drawing, painting, photography, and this track was fairly new at Alabama. So I was doing a little bit of everything. So I pulled together some very interesting images of what my work was then. So I was doing photography, I was doing painting, I was doing like that's a etch a sketch that I built in real life and it was actually functional. So I'll just say that. Lots of different stuff. And leads me to my next message, which is pay attention to your experience. Nothing in your journey happens for no reason. And it's interesting because when I look back at this now, I'm like, wow, I've always been this person. I've always been this curious person. And it didn't make sense until I got deeper into my career. So pay attention to how everything lines up in your life because that's going to lead you to something. So the journey, I went from school to not so hot internships. As you can imagine, Alabama isn't known for a place of like arts, unfortunately. And even though there are lots of jobs there, the design jobs were more like military based. It wasn't necessarily the type of creative jobs that I wanted. So I had to go out of my like scope of opportunity and look for like remote internships, unpaid internships, which I don't know if I would recommend that, but I had to do what I had to do for my portfolio. And honestly, a bunch of moments where it was like, what am I doing? But again, I was desperate, needed portfolio work. That led me to a relentless hustle. I was doing everything I needed to do to get something under my belt. And that's something I always recommend of like, don't wait for things to be handed to you or wait for your journey to like just naturally go. Sometimes you got to hustle it out. So this led to my first internship, which I call Disney Round One. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Disney College program. I ran into two recruiters like in our student center, and they were like, "Hey, we have this program. You work in the park. You take some classes." To be honest, I still didn't know what I was going to do with my life. This was the end of my design degree, and so I was like, "Sure, let's figure it out." So I get there and I end up working in the park and I work at the place that I did not want to work, which was food and beverage. And I say that because at this point, I have 2 degrees. The classes that I were taking in this program were more like resume building, business cards, which at that point I already knew how to do that. So I really couldn't understand why I was doing this. Um, and that led me to like a set of skills that I believe that really developed there and helped me later on, which was one, I had to sacrifice. I really wanted to go home. Kid you not. Like I was scooping ice cream all day, my arms hurt. I wanted to go home, but I had to see the bigger picture in being attached to the Disney brand. It was very humbling in a way where my education at that point didn't necessarily matter. It was just about the job I was doing at the time. Resources, the Disney name, it put me in that family to some extent. Kindness, even though I had worked in customer service and like retail for a lot of my time, like in high school and in college, if you ever been to a Disney park, it's a different level of like kindness and patience that you have to deal with everybody in the park. The last piece is the grind. I had to work hard in order to even get referrals or even just get different places within that internship. Finish the internship, I'm rerouting back to Alabama, trying to figure out my life. And I end up working where I actually went to middle school at. So, sort of like where it first started. Since I have the computer science minor, I worked as an IT analyst in the middle school. And so the whole time I'm there, I'm like, yo, I got to get out. I got to figure this out. And so I realized that I had to use what I had to get what I want. And what I had was the Disney name. And so I literally applied for jobs, probably in every single area of the Walt Disney Company known to man, to the point that when they finally did contact me, they're like, hey, girl, we've seen your resume 1,000 times and we finally have something for you. And so that sacrifice that I made for, scooping ice cream and dropping fries, that led to having Disney on my resume and being able to use it for a job opportunity. Another thing is I don't come from money. So when I got the internship call, they're like, "Hey, we have this opportunity in California." My family is like, "With whose money?" And I had to be resourceful and I had to put my ego to the side. So I mentioned I went to the University of Alabama. They have a huge alumni network, and I literally cold emailed people with like the email of like, "Yo, here's my story. I've been out here grinding, but I need financial help to get to this opportunity." And surprising enough, a family reached out and was like, "Yo, we'll throw you like $700." So I ended up moving with like maybe like 12 to $1,500. Still nothing, but it was more than what I had. So closed mouths do not get fed. You got to open your mouth and tell people what you want. So that led to my transition into Los Angeles. So at this point, we got the school, we got the no, not so hot internships, and then we get to the shot. This is the shot where I'm like, okay, I gotta make it. And a lot of times people ask me like, well, what kept you going? Were you scared? And honestly, it was the driving force of not wanting to go back to Alabama. And to give you context, I got the internship with Imagineering. They do their internships like in a 3 month pocket. So every 3 months, you might be like out of there. And so you have to make sure that you know you're keeping yourself valuable, that it's enough overhead, all these different things. And so I had this inherent drive to make sure I could stay. So you got to find your driving force. Another thing I had to learn was I had to adjust my comfort zone. I wasn't always this like extroverted, bubbly person. And I learned very quickly that in order to survive, I needed to change things that I didn't feel necessarily comfortable with. And I always talk about my mom in just interviews and my work, and she's someone who's highly extroverted. So I had to tap into her to make sure I could like just stay relevant in what was going on. And also just like networking, which leads me to networking. Tool is not necessarily about what you can do, but almost about who you know. And I don't always like that phrase because I want both. Like I want people to hire me because I do great work and I also want to like build community. But one thing that I learned is that in order to survive, you have to have just that community. You have to get out. You have to talk to people. And it's not just about networking like up, but it's networking across your peers, your immediate boss, like literally everybody. It's good to talk to people because not only are you building community, but you're building allies, which leads me to my next point. You got to have people in your corner. And that's something I learned early on. And that's something that I believe has helped me in my career of having people on my side that actually care. Okay, so another thing is being of service when you think about networking, not coming from a place of like just what they can do for you, but also thinking about what you can do for them. What are things that you can offer to make their life easier? Because that builds a trust with people. And then it also helps people want to help you. And it doesn't feel like real like scammy, like you're just trying to get things out of people. It gives like that give and take relationship. So that was something that I learned to lead with while being at Disney. Knowledge. Every person of color has probably heard this, which is you have to be twice as good. And like I mentioned, like my family doesn't come from money. I wasn't as familiar with the Disney brand as my peers because we had been to the park, like I don't know, a couple of times in Florida, but a lot of the people who work there, they lived and breathed Disney. They knew they wanted to work there their entire lives. So I feel like I came in as a disadvantage. And so I had to go out my way to learn things. And I had situations at work where literally people were like, "Yo, you gotta bring more to the table than just being who you are." And I'm paraphrasing, it was much more rude than that. But like I knew I had to step my game up and I knew I had to be knowledgeable and I knew I needed to come into the room at least about my projects, knowing um just knowing things at a different level. Resourcefulness. Um, be resourceful in your pursuit. And I say this with a grain of salt, but you have to use jobs as much as they use you. And so think about the resources that your job can offer that kind of go alongside what you do at your job. So for me, I had access to, a directory of emails for the Walt Disney Company. So I would take meetings, at ESPN and ABC, all these places because they gave me the resources to do so. And so to me, it felt like a disconnect if I didn't use that to my advantage. So use your resources, don't let the resources use you. Take advantage. That pretty much goes hand in hand of what I just said. Take advantage of the situation, the people that you're around, the knowledge that you have access to. Take advantage. Don't look at yourself as not worthy enough to take advantage of the things that are there. Again, follow your curiosity and follow your gut. There were many situations where people would say, like, hey, instead of you trying to learn motion graphics and that's not necessarily your skill set, you should learn like Keynote, which learning Keynote is great. Like, I whipped up this presentation pretty quick, but there were certain things I was curious about that I knew I wanted to learn more about in general. And so I had to learn how to take in the opinion of others, but then also go for what I want to know and follow my gut in that. Your difference is your strength. Stay different. When I first got here, I would be one, the only Black person in the room, more than likely. The only one from the South. It was just a lot of differences. And I realized that like people, I don't know, I would feel insecure about it because people would, like mock how I speak or like just do different things. And so it was to the point where I really wanted to change myself. And it was a meeting in particular that I was able to sit in with a bunch of like big corporate people in the company. And I remember my boss telling me afterwards that one of the people that were in the room were like, "Hey, the girl from the South, like we remember her and we love her ideas. Like she stuck out." And that's what told me that the things that make me different are the things that make me powerful. So while everybody was like, having stuff to say, I was the one that was sticking out in all these different rooms because essentially I was bringing my authentic self to the table. Exhaust all options. While I was in this position and I went from I interned for a year and then I actually worked there for another year and a half. It became a point where like the department that I was in was changing. It was a lot of changes. And so I had to make a decision of like, do I stay? Do I go? And due to how I decided to go about networking, I was able to go around to different departments and different divisions to just make sure I didn't leave a stone unturned, and to also leave and take freelance work with me. So before you make a move, exhaust all your options, see what's out there. Um, Make sure you're talking to people and telling people like what you want. So, journey, we went from the education, we went from the not so high internships, then we got to the big shot, and then now it's next steps. Next steps, I wasn't able to find somewhere that felt like me, but again, I was able to like take jobs with me out of the company. And so my next step was ABC, which I ended up there from networking and using those resources. I was only at ABC for a few months, just being transparent, and I'll get to why later on. But the biggest thing that I took away from that job was to pay attention to the details. I had a senior designer who was on my butt about every single little nitpicky thing, and it drove me crazy. But I realized that that helped me build my attention span, and it makes me pay attention to the fine details. And that's a skill set that you can't take for granted. So one gem that I learned was just pay attention to the details, be intricate in your craft. Keep the family close and stay flexible. I probably said networking like 15 times already. But from doing that, I was able to connect with a recruiter who just randomly hit me up and was like, "Yo, we have this job at this company called CAA. I think you'll be great for it." At the time, I was cool with ABC. My schedule was flexible. I wasn't really into the work, but it was kind of like, "Oh, okay, I can still freelance." I think I was like off on Fridays. It was cool, but something in me was like, stay open, stay flexible. Another thing is take the meeting. Always take the meeting. Even if you know you may not, unless it's something where you're like, yo, this job just is totally left field and I just know it's no way I'm ever going to go. Take the meeting because it's also a form of getting to know somebody. There might be an opportunity that comes up later on that you might actually like. So take the meeting, which is what I did at CAA. Took the meeting, I was interested in the opportunity surprisingly because, it was a job that wasn't even close to my apartment. But one of the things that came up was they wanted me to sort of do like a test run. In order for me to do that, I would need to like leave my current job because with Hollywood, it's a conflict of interest, blah, blah. And so I was like, we'll see. But then I was like, no, I can't do that. So essentially, I had to stand my ground and say no. And that just taught me that if somebody wants you, they know. And a lot of times there could be different politics around that, but something in me was just like, if you've gone through these amount of interviews and they want you, they know. So that led me to my mistake. And it was hard to even put this slide together because even though it was a mistake, it was a mistake that actually helped me in my career, which is I took a pay cut. I had a great boss at Disney that actually gave me a salary that was way more than what I needed to be paid with my skill set, not gonna lie. But it set like a certain like tempo of what I should be paid. And for this job, I ended up taking a pay cut. And the reason why I say this is a mistake because if you're listening, you're watching, pay attention to the fine print in that, because it could be a situation where they're like, hey, if you're going to make up for it in bonuses or different things, and that doesn't work out. So pay attention, learn from my mistake. Don't take the pay cut if you don't have to. Then that led to the pivot. The pivot was going to CAA, which again, I was cool with my ABC job, didn't know I was going to do that. So at this point, we've gone from the shot to the next steps, which is ABC, and now I'm in like the center of Hollywood, which not like neighborhood Hollywood, but like CAA is Hollywood. At this point, new game, same rules, different stage. A lot of the things that we talked about with my Disney journey applied here, but it was just at a totally different level. Networking. Who knows you and what can you do? This was different in this situation because the team that I was on was more tight knit. And so it was very much so like, n- again, networking across. I needed to like be allies with my peers. There are so many people that I was constantly working with across the company, and people needed to know like who I am and what I can do. Another thing that I learned was confronting fear. If you know anything about the entertainment industry, there are some very strong personalities. And so instead of sort of like being shy about that, I had to dive in head first and say, like, hey, this is who I am. I look forward to working with you. Let's figure out how we can come up with like a great working relationship. Allies, once again, from the janitors to partners of the company. I wanted to make sure that I had people across the board who could speak about my character and be a champion of who I am as a person as well as my work. Be of service. This was quite different from my Disney experience because when I went into CAA, I knew that there were certain things that were in my interest that I wanted to be a part of. Like, for instance, I love music. So I would connect with people who are music agents and say, like, hey, this is what I do from a design standpoint, but how can I be of service to you? Can I create assets for your artists? Can I do things that were outside of my scope of work? Again, that knowledge had to be there. I had to work twice as hard. I had to show up early, stay late. All the things that you hear about, I this is the job where I really had to double down on these skill sets. Be a competitor. I consider myself a competitive person, but not necessarily in a way that is a comparison to my peers. But in this situation, Hollywood is competitive. I knew I needed to stand out, and I knew I needed to make a name for myself because one, you want to get promoted, you want to get raised and all that stuff. But two, I really looked at this job as a stepping stone that would help me whatever my next step was. So when you feel the need to be a competitor, resourcefulness. Um, this looked different in this job as well because it wasn't just about the connections that I got from it. It was also using the tangible tools. So, for instance, like we had a photo studio we barely used. I started working as a photographer during this job. I started learning video. I started learning editing, all these different things, which led to me executing my own projects within my job. Now don't do this if you think you're gonna get fired, because I don't want to get you fired. But I knew in this situation that it would be cool to do these things. So here's a few examples of things that I executed within my time at the company, from merchandise to just creative direction shoots, and so on and so forth. Again, take advantage, use your resources. Follow your curiosity and follow your gut. As you see, there's certain things that I'm repeating because they're the most important things. Like for me, it was wanting to do my own product, wanting to do more creative direction, and really just going for it. Be selfish. What do you want? Tell people what you want. And that was something I learned to do later on is instead of sort of beating around the bush, it's like, hey, I want to do A, B, and C. Like help me help you. Bring your full self to the table. We discussed this a little bit in regards to the Disney experience. But I really, really learned that by being myself authentically and showing up just as me was more important than my skill set at some point because it was building trust with my peers, it was building trust with my allies, it was building trust within the company. Exhaust all options. I was at the point where I knew I was gonna leave at some point, and I was like, okay, let me figure out what I need to do and how I need to do it. And that's again making sure you leave no stone unturned. A challenge. So I knew I wanted to leave. Um, I was doing more traditional design work, but actually, when I was at Disney, I started illustrating, but it wasn't my main skill set. And so here, I'm like, hey, I really love illustration. I need to figure out how to do that. And so I gave myself a challenge for 30 days, which of course this isn't all the illustrations. I created an illustration and posted on Instagram. And I mean, my friends can tell you I did illustrations in cars, planes, buses, trains. I just had to make sure that I was able to execute what I said I was going to do. And this actually led to attracting clients, being intentional in your pursuit. So while I was coming up with my illustrations, I wasn't just like, oh, well, I'm going to draw whatever today. I thought about the things that I was interested in. Like, I really wanted to work with Nike at some point. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to draw shoes. So let's say it was a shoe that came out for women on a Saturday, then I would be intentional about drawing that shoe then because I felt like it would get, more eyes on it in that schedule. So be intentional about your pursuit. Who, what, when, where, and how. Uh, Basically what I just said of like, what do I want to do? When do I want to do it? Where and how? Like, how do all those things come together? And shoot, along with being intentional about what I want to do. And this, I feel like social media was a little different then. I would tag people in my post. So let's say I did post that shoe, then I'm tagging like Jordan, Nike, Foot Locker, Foot Action, and saying like, hey, look at me, like look what I'm doing, and hoping that someone would see it, which eventually that's what worked. Lean into your voice. It's special. Um, and for me, it was just that of realizing that everything that I have to say, even if it didn't necessarily feel important to the greater world, it was special to me. And that's what makes you stick out versus everybody else is leaning into the things that you're interested in, leaning into the things that make you you. Networking online. So again, with me tagging people and just brands and stuff, I also just started researching like, okay, let me see who the editor is at this company. And if I check her page out, I'm like, oh, okay, I like her work. Like I'm gonna champion that. And again, like don't do it from a place of I want this. Do it from a place of I'm interested in you and I like what you're doing and I want to support you. And that's gonna build an actual rapport. Exhaust all options. I keep going to that because you really have to make sure you're not leaving the stone unturned. And so keep in mind, I'm doing this challenge while I'm still working my full time job and I'm trying to figure out what's next. And so by me doing this challenge, it unlocked a lot of doors for me to have a freelance career, which isn't what I had planned at the time. So I'm getting all these freelance clients. I'm realizing that I'm going to quit. So I put in my notice. And this was a point where I learned power. So I put in my notice, and my boss at the time is like, well, what do you want to stay? And understanding power is understanding when to use it and when it isn't actually there. And so I knew that I didn't want to be, and also being decisive. I knew I didn't want to be in that department, and I knew that wasn't for me. Um, but I knew that I had made connections throughout the rest of the company where I could probably do something else somewhere else. So I told him like, "Hey, no, I'm good. I've enjoyed my time here." Then I went and had another conversation, and was able to negotiate a way where I could still work for the company in a different department in the privacy of my own home, which was the best thing for me because I was able to launch my business and still have substantial money coming in. So know your power, know when to show your cards, and know when to negotiate. Pivot. I was out. So at this point, I've gone from Hollywood to LLC land. I'm working for myself. One thing about having a business, you won't have everything figured out ever. Ever. I went in not I didn't even have an LLC when I first started my business. I was like, "Hey, if I get a job that pays me $10,000, I'm quitting." And literally, I did that 30-day challenge. I was drawing things like shoes and like a lot of stuff that resonated in pop culture. I got a job offer, a freelance job offer from Jordan Brand that paid $10,000. And I was like, I'm out. So I didn't have everything figured out. I may not recommend you do that for your business because to each his own, but you're not going to have everything figured out and it's okay. Stay afloat. You might have to take some low hanging fruit. And that means you might have to take jobs you don't necessarily like. You may not just quit your job and think, hey, I'm going to get all these brand deals and stuff. That doesn't work. The Jordan Brand thing was an exception. There were lots of jobs that I took that I was like, yo, I don't want to do this, but I also got to eat. So be open and accept help. There became a point in my journey where friends were like, hey, you might need a manager. I was like, no, I don't. I just need to be better organized. And so, with that, I ended up taking a meeting with someone that a friend recommended about having management. And both of us sort of came to the table and, like, no, I don't know. Like, I'm not really trying to manage somebody. And for me, it's like, I don't need a manager. And come to find out, I absolutely did, which has helped my career so much. So, always be open and always be open to accepting help. Think bigger and take yourself seriously. With the manager, I was like, wow, this is much bigger than me. And it's time to think bigger as a brand and as a person. Values. You must have a code that you live by. And for me, what I mean by that is you must have a set of things that you can abide by when you decide to take on work or go towards different projects or whatever it may be. And for me, I've always had these values. I didn't look at them as a value system until I was able to get my manager. And she was like, hey, we need to have a set of values. So for me, it's authenticity, storytelling. Everything has to have a story, representation, living unapologetically, liberation and rights. And then we go into interests, which for me is Black representation and Black people, the idea of everyday life. A lot of my work reflects that. Multiple forms of visual storytelling, again, very multidisciplinary, and having different disciplines, sort of like a Swiss Army knife of not necessarily being a jack of all trades necessarily, but having things that can work together for a greater good. And so for me, it's always referring to your values and interests. And everything you do should lie within that. So, questions that I ask myself: does it align with values? Does it fit within interests? Would I be proud of this? Are there any other miscellaneous incentives? Budget and timeline. So, again, went from Hollywood to LLC to So Lacy Land. And if you follow me on social media, you know my handle is like So Lacy Like. And this at some point was like, okay, I'm literally creating a world for myself. It's bigger than freelancing, it's a brand, which boom, there's freelancing and there's creating a brand. And technically, if you're still listening, when it comes to growing a brand and you're like, okay, well, how do I define that? You've already laid the groundwork. You have the experience, you have to explore and be curious. You have to define your code, which is like your set of values. Authenticity, staying true to yourself and your interests. Work, expand, repeat. You cannot do any of this without the bottom. You have to work, you have to expand, you have to repeat. And for me, it hits me at different times because there's so many moments I could reflect to where it's like, oh, I wish I could like take pictures that look like that, or I wish my eye knew how to see certain things. And by me constantly being around those things, that's what happened. Um, I got the experience. I explored. I started defining who I am as a person and then being authentic, staying true to your interests. And then you just keep doing that. And it's not a thing where it's like, oh, you have to work for 30 years to get it together. You just have to put the work in and believe in yourself. That might sound cliche, but it's 1,000% right. Again, be multifunctional. And that doesn't mean you have to have all these different skill sets. If you're like, hey, I want to work within just product design, be the best at product design. Know how to create different type of products, because that helps you too when you become a leader. Don't be afraid to expand. Remember, all your experiences lead to each other. So if you go back and listen, or if you've been keeping track, every experience I've had has been like a flip to each one. Everything expands to the other. From my school and education and being, learning different skill sets, from Disney and being very curious to learning how to network, to CAA and like expanding the network and also doing different disciplines, it all adds up to where I am today. Last words, because I just gave you a mouthful. I got this text from a friend, and it is so true. Don't overthink your gifts. You got it. You're special with it. You're here because you're supposed to be here. So thank you. I know that was a lot. I appreciate everybody for watching. I appreciate everybody for being here. And thank you, Adobe, for having me. If you want to follow me, again, so Laci like all across social media. And if you want to email me, laci@solacilike.com. Thank you so much. And I'll see you guys later.